Hi everyone, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here, and today we're taking a first look at a new artificial intelligence reverb from iZotope. This is Neoverb. So just before we dive in, this is something that I've been kind of testing the beta for a while. It's very clever, and it kind of makes space for itself in the mix by some very clever techniques which we're about to look at. But before we do, I'm going to just do the housekeeping thing and just ask if you would kindly hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, tell your friends, support the Patreon, do all that kind of stuff. No advert, just that. Thank you everybody. And now we go to me playing guitar through Neoverb and then looking at it in context of a full mix. Yeah, you know what? I'll take that. That sounds nice. That's a good start. This is Neoverb, and we're going to do two things today. We're going to play a guitar through it, and then we're going to use it in a mix context afterwards. So if you're interested in talking about this in a mix context, stick around. Firstly, let's show you this beauty. This is the Vola that I'm using. Beautiful guitar. 2 single coils and a humbucker. I'm using the neck pickup right now, and it's giving me that big, nice sound. So without Neoverb on, just quickly, I am using the Slate THU. I think I'm just going to put a gate in there so it doesn't drive us all insane, because it's a single coil. There we go. And it's a Soldano clean, and it sounds very clean. But if I start to hit it, well, not only is it slightly clipping on the interface there, but it's just an overall nice kind of sound. Very dry, slightly gritty. And it means that when I turn on Neoverb, we get this nice, big, lush sound. And this is the default when I load up Neoverb. It does this. And that's 50% dry wet. Very nice indeed. Now, this is broken up into several sections. It's a bit much at first. The middle's really simple, so it's made up of early reflections, a kind of a medium-ish reverb, and a big-ish reverb. And the finer points are all on the left-hand side. And this big blob here, I can move in between them. So if I want just the super short reverb, I mean super short, sounds like this. And yes, that does have reverb on it. Here's it without. And it does get a little quieter, but here's with. So I'm really stabbing the guitar there, so you can definitely hear that as a different thing. Now here's the plate. So that really does have a slightly shimmery, medium feel. And then here we have a hall reverb, and that should sound much bigger. And so, by default, we have a little bit of all three. Very nice. Now we can edit each one of these. There's a big tab, and if I press that, that opens this whole thing up. So the top row is that first one, the reflections. And I'm just going to make sure that's all the way on, just to demonstrate this. And I can move the size, which is kind of a shortcut. As you can see here, it's changing these two as well. So I can make the reflections bigger. They can be really short with that kind of almost not there kind of sound, all the way up to and you can use that for some of those really cool late 80s type sounds. And so if I make the time something a bit more sane, yeah, and they're quite dark, so I can open up the top end a bit. That's actually a really good reverb to use in a mix to make something pop and stand out without really washing out a mix. It can be really useful for that kind of thing. Now let's just listen to the plate, because the plate can be swapped out for a medium chamber or a room. So here's the plate again. And we can make that bigger. Still sounds really nice. It's got that high dampening, it's not overly nasty. And then we can swap that out for a medium chamber. Not usually my kind of thing, a chamber. I would prefer a plate, but there's also a room. Which is a bit more realistic. If I bring the reverb time down there. I would probably use that subtly in a mix to give a whole mix some kind of glue. But then there's the hall. Oh, yes, so there's the hall, which is much more ambient. And that really does start to trip over itself. There's a large chamber. Bit more high-endy, and then there's the hall. Wait, so there's only 2 on that one, not 3. Duh. You can click the button to just turn the whole thing off as well. So you can very quickly just have, even if you've got a nice mix going, I can make it so that just by clicking a button I've just got 2 of them. Or just all 3. Sounds nice. There's also an option to modulate that delay, so if we go crazy with that. There we go, that's nice. And there's a button to smooth the whole thing out. Which seems to make the top end not stick out as much. Very subtle, but I like it. And then of course there's a pre-delay. If you have no pre-delay, then the reverb is going to start interrupting whatever's happening, which can be a good thing, but usually I find it's not. Interestingly, with no pre-delay, it sounds like the guitar is kind of in the reverb a lot more, whereas if I bring the pre-delay back up to that 20-ish milliseconds, suddenly the guitar has its own clear voice on top of the reverb. Because it has that 20 milliseconds to attack before it gets into the reverb. We can go crazy with that. Oh god, it does a full second, so I can go. That's too much. But I have heard, like, London Grammar's a really good example where they use quite a dark, large reverb, but have quite a long pre-delay on it to make it sound huge. Now that's all really cool, but let's say this is now getting in the way of the playing. There's the auto cut button, so if I hit that and then start playing, this is going to cut away parts of the what's going into the reverb. It's not going to affect the dry tone, but it's going to affect what's going into the reverb, so it behaves very differently. There we go. You can see there are little dips here where it's detected that there's a little spike around 5K and a little dip around 1K where it suddenly just cleared up the EQ just a little bit. And of course, there's the same thing but with the overall reverb EQ. So I can choose dry versus wet for it to use as comparison. Or if you've got things like Neuron from iZotope going, you can tell it this is the rest of the mix, or say this is the guitar track and you're masking the vocals, for example. You can then use that to make space EQ-wise automatically on that particular track to really bring that track out. I find that means that you can actually have more reverb in a track without it feeling like it's taking over. Really useful. So here's the unmask feature. Right, so that's got some significant dips in there now. So now if I play, and that suddenly sounds like a full lush reverb over this guitar, whilst you can hear every single note that I'm playing. Unfortunately, you can also hear the mistakes, but the point is there. And so the last thing that I'll play with now is the Reverb Assistant. So that will do everything that we've just done, but essentially in one swift move, so you can choose whether you want this to be more realistic or dramatic. Let's go with dramatic. Let's make it really big sounding and dark. And so I hit next and then I start to play. And that has automatically done all of that for us, including choosing how much of each reverb, which looking at these numbers, this is mostly the plate now. So I could dial that back towards, looking at the numbers, that should have been more like there. Nice, and it says no significant masking detected, probably because, yeah, it's done a really aggressive pre-EQ here. It's really taken the top end out of what's going in to the reverb, which really changes the behaviour. Listen now for the top end on the reverb. Almost got a delay in there now, but because that's such a dark reverb, if I start playing single notes, they should be much clearer. very nice. And you can repeat the process with the Reverb Assistant as many times as you like until it hits something that works for you, because as you play whatever the instrument is, with the settings you've got, it will change things. So let's look at this now in the context of a full mix. Alright, I have in front of me a rather busy pop-punk mix with lots of guitars, lots of vocals, lots of drums, and it sounds a bit like this. So there's a lot going on there. Now, let's have a look at what I've done in the effects group. So I have a small room reverb, which is something I do to give guitars a lot of space. It makes them sound fuller in a mix to me. I also have a shiny plate reverb going on the backing vocals. The main vocals in this case were already recorded in a fairly reverberant room, so they didn't actually need anything extra. And then the snare has this massive reverb on, based on the DRE 2000 from Sony. Which is almost kind of a non-linear style big reverb. That's going to be interesting to recreate with Neoverb. So let's go back to this small room, which was a Bricasti M7 room, just straight up. Arguably has too much low end in, so although I do like to push some extra low end on a reverb on bass. It sounds weird, sounds like you shouldn't do it, and maybe you shouldn't do it, but I find that it makes a bass sound wider in a mix. Just works for me. So let's listen to what I did in Neoverb and talk you through it. So there we go, sounds very similar, and what I did is I went almost entirely for the early reflections, played with the space, and I used the Reverb Assistant to help me out with the EQ, and then I've made it really dark and added a lot of low end, so that it's got that kind of short, small room feel without the big top end reflections to muddy up the mix. See, that's too much. And if I make that too small, that won't fill out the mix. Let's listen to the mix with and without this. And without. Alright, and so there you go. Now, the snare verb, this was fun because this is a big... And without that in the mix, suddenly the snare doesn't pop, it sounds really dry. Now, there's only so much of that I could add into the mix because suddenly it starts to take over. And that's where Neoverb can come in again. So I've turned off the original and now I've got Neoverb. But this time I'm going to just use the Reverb Assistant. So I want this to be realistic, medium-sized, dark. And let's hit play and hit next. There we go, so the pre-EQs made that fairly dark, some significant cuts there. I'm going to make the space on this early reflection really big. Funny, I found with the angle on the reflections, if I go beyond 50%, it's almost reversed. There we go. So that now sounds like a big kind of thing. But I'm also going to blend in some of this medium chamber, but make sure that's quite short. So then we've got that kind of dual reverb thing going on. Cool, so let's blend the two together now. So here's the original. And this one's quite a lot bigger sounding. Let's also hit the smooth button here and turn that on to see if that just does what it says. Much nicer. Now let's try that in the mix and out. We can always give it a little bit less if it's too much. Great, so I've taken a few dB off there and I'm going to try the on-off now. Brilliant, and the plate should be an easy one. So that was. And so let's go straight to the plate. This one you can see I've really scooped the low end out. So I'm going to take the top end off the result as well a little bit. There we go. Let's try that in with the vocals. Just the vocals, just for a listen.
Juckt mich nicht, wenn ich bei dir bin. Du siehst mich, so wie ich gerne will. Scheiß auf die Kilometer, ich komm immer wieder her.
And that's really nice how that low mid's really been scooped out. There's a point here around 2K that's been dipped out, which is kind of the intelligibility region of a vocal. So the clarity of understanding. By taking out little bits of that, that means that I can push the reverb more, have more of a reverb sound without it interfering. So in the mix we get this. And that sounds really good to me. So, back to me in the studio. Hope you found this useful and maybe even enjoyed it. If you did, like I said at the start, please hit the like button, tell your friends, support the Patreon, all that kind of stuff really helps us to keep this going and do more of these kind of videos to show you what's going on. Stick around, there's mix streams every week or two. There's our weekly podcast. There's loads of gear reviews, including that wonderful Vola guitar that you saw. That's coming up very soon. Lots of amps, lots of pedals, lots of software, lots and lots of lots. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.
Hey everyone. That might be the end of the video, but if you fancy carrying on this conversation, we have a Discord server, link is in the description. We're also on Patreon, which is something you can really help us with. We also are on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Hot Pole Studios. See you there.